morning, everybody. Glad you could join us today. Apparently, a few of you in parts of the UK are being battered with storms at the moment, so I hope you're safe, including our very own Howard Redwood, who you might not be able to see on screen at the moment, but that's because apparently it's blowing a hoolie outside of his house. So he'll be largely quiet unless he needs to interject furiously on anything this morning. But hopefully you all know who I am. If not, I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm Chief Executive of the DIA Group, and I'm very pleased to see many of you on here today. I know it's difficult getting onto these webinars because you're so damn busy at the moment out there training your pupils. But if you have colleagues who haven't been able to make it today, just remind them that this will be recorded and we will be sharing this on the Academy later on so they can catch up on webinars like this at their own leisure. I am conscious as we go into darker nights, some of you may not be training as much as you are in the evening going forward. So we'll try and schedule some of our webinars in the evening as much as we do in the daytime so we can work around your timetables rather than you working around ours. I'm very pleased to say that today I am joined by the lovely Simon Turner from the Driving for Better Business campaign. He will give a much more effective introduction of who he is and what he does for DFBB and what DFBB does indeed in this webinar. So if you are a fleet trainer or wider occupational driver trainer, or you're interested in getting into that arena, this is a really good webinar to join because Simon's going to tell us how Driving for Better Business can really support fleet trainers with some really good resources that they've got on board now that are largely free to use for you guys as well. So you'll be glad you came to this webinar, if only for that. So I'm going to kick over to Simon straight away. Just points of administration. Very happy to take your questions towards the end is better so Simon can get through his presentation. It's not a tedious and long presentation like we sometimes have on here, mainly from myself. So we'll take your questions mainly at the end. However, you can chat with us, express views, raise points in both the chat function and the Q&A, which you'll find in your toolbar at the bottom. And myself and Howard will deal with those as we go, but we'll largely save the questions we said from the end. So Simon, over to you, kicking off.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carly. And hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to talk to you all today. I'm the campaign manager for Driving for Better Business, which is a multi-award winning national highways program to help employers reduce work-related road risk. Carly mentioned that largely everything is free. I would say it's all free. So the one thing I'm not here to do today is try and sell you anything. Basically what Driving for Better Business is, view it a bit like the Think campaign. It's a marketing campaign, but it's aimed at businesses and fleet operators to encourage them to manage driver risk properly. We won a Prince Michael International Road Safety Award for the programme and its resources recently, and we've also won a number of awards for individual resources that could possibly help you, and I'll talk to you about those later on in the presentation. So what we're going to cover today is a little summary of what work-related road risk actually is and how to identify it and support companies that may be exposed to it. The benefits of managing it well, which essentially is the business case for selling services to manage that risk into businesses. The opportunities that could present for you to expand your services into fleet clients, and how we can help you with some of the resources that we've got available, which are all free. So to look at what work-related road risk actually is, there are about 20 million vehicles in the UK that are used for work, which is around about half of all the vehicles registered, and roughly that's 700,000 company cars. I think just over 4.5 company vans, half a million trucks or so, but a significant area of grey fleet, which is thought to number about 14 million. So that's where we get the 20 million figure from. And work-related road risk is essentially the risk that any employee may be involved in a collision while driving one of those vehicles for work, which could put themselves at risk or other road users. Now, what I like to do is to compare this to health and safety fatalities, or ordinary fatalities at work, because in the last reportable year there were 123 of those, which is obviously a significant number, and there's billions of pounds spent each year by companies trying to minimize the risk of that happening to them. But actually, when you look at the fatalities of driving for work, it's around 500 and just over 500 each year. We've got our figures are slightly older because the police no longer report journey purpose as part of their figures. We're hoping that's going to be reinstated from next year, so we should be able to get some more up-to-date figures. But the key thing to take from this is that those fatalities aren't normally the person who was driving for work. That person has normally hit another vulnerable road user. So I think the actual figure is about 82%, where a van driver has hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, something like that. So it's a significant risk to the business. But of course, unless you're running one of the UK's biggest fleets, where managing fatalities actually becomes a significant, almost a certainty, many smaller businesses won't encounter that. So I tend to focus more around injury casualties. And according to the Department for Transport, there are around 40,000 reported injury collisions every year, injury casualties, sorry, each year that involve someone driving for work. And again, they're often more vulnerable road users. So to give that some context, I don't know how many of you play the National Lottery, but if you do you know the odds of winning the jackpot? It's a rather staggering 1 in 45 million, and millions of people every week sit there thinking it might be me. At 1 in 45 million, it really won't be you. But if we divide that 40,000 injury casualties into the 20 million vehicles, the odds of being involved in an injury collision while driving for work are 1 in 500. And that's something that when we show that to employers, it really gets the message across about what the risk is that they're looking at. So there's legal obligations to manage these, and that's sort of set out in health and safety at work legislation and guidance from the Health and Safety Executive, which centres around their sort of established plan, do, check, act formula, which essentially means in the driving world, conduct a risk assessment of all your driving activities to find out where the risks are and create a policy that covers those risks. That then needs communicating effectively to everybody that needs to see it. It's not just drivers, because there'll be other people in the company or the organisation who will have an impact on driver safety. And I'll cover that in a few minutes' time. Arrange any training required. It is the law that employees receive training for anything that you would think should have training. And then procedures need to be put in place to monitor that those policies and procedures are being followed, measure performance, record improvements, and tighten up procedures where necessary. So that is, in a nutshell, employers' responsibilities. But where can risk occur? So what I thought I'd do is just talk you through effectively a day in the life of a van driver and where the risk occurs. And there's lots of different risks that occur of each of those. I've split it up into nine segments. And what's really important about all of this is not just that these risks are managed, but that they are proved to be managed. So one of the key things, effectively in law, if a company ended up in court because one of their drivers had a serious incident, it doesn't matter what they did, it matters what they can prove that they did. So they have to document that they managed effectively all the risks that I'm going to talk you through in these 9 sections here. So the first bit, which is what I've just said there. So what they need to understand is what needs to be checked and managed, but more importantly, that it's recorded. So if we start with drivers, the first thing is obviously license checks and personal details. You've got to understand who is driving for your business. There are many businesses where they don't check licenses. It's if you talk to a professional outsourced license checking bureau, they will quite often tell you that for a reasonable sized company, at the point they decide to implement license checks, they can expect to lose 1 to 2% of their staff because they won't actually have a valid driving license, and they've been driving while ineligible to do so. So it's really crucial that a business understands who's driving for them and that they're eligible to do it. Specifically, vehicle entitlement, obviously, if you're asking them to drive specialist vehicles. Previously, that included towing as well, but obviously the towing restrictions have been lifted now. So while it's not a requirement to have a towing category on your license, I would count that as a legal requirement to provide towing training to anyone asked to tow, because that's a very complex and dangerous maneuver. You need to understand medical conditions. There's a number of incidents where that's been critical. The Glasgow bin lorry incident was one such, where the bin lorry driver had heart failure while he was driving and killed a number of people. And it was only because Glasgow Council could clearly show that they'd done everything reasonably possible to check their driver's medical conditions that they weren't considered to be in any way at fault for that. And obviously you need to keep track of collision history and training records so that you know what your drivers are up to and whether any further interventions are necessary. So that's at recruitment. Fitness to drive. So on the morning they get up to work for you, many companies demand a fitness to drive declaration. That can be done through apps, which also look at sort of vehicle checks as well. So are they fit to drive? Have they had much alcohol or drugs the night before? Drug use is a massively increasing problem at the moment. I was told figures for one police force from the pre-Christmas drink and drug enforcement campaign from last year, which was extended to 6 weeks to cover the end of the football. And they were catching 3 times as many drug drivers as drink drivers, and half of those drug drivers were commercial vehicle drivers, either at work or on their way to work, and would have been driving for work before the effects had worn off. So that's a significant thing. Driver fatigue, again, there was a company a couple of years ago fined £750,000 for a double fatality as a result, not because they weren't managing fatigue. They had policies in place, but they were failing to follow their own established policies. So again, one of the really important things about risk management is having a policy and sticking to it, not sticking it on a shelf somewhere and not managing it. So things like driver's hours, shift patterns, that can all affect mental health. And work schedules can create fatigue as well. So fitness to drive is a key thing that needs to be managed. Then we come to vehicle roadworthiness. Vehicle checks are critical and an industry expected thing. Daily vehicle checks for vans and larger commercial vehicles, obviously. Daily checks less so with cars, but certainly regular checks still that would be considered reasonable. And it's important really that all the drivers are given training. It's not simply acceptable to tell 100 van drivers working for you that they need to check their vans. You've got to check that those checks are carried out properly. They're checking the right things. They know how to check them. They're spending the right amount of time on it, and that those checks are monitored and any defects noted are rectified. Defect management is a key thing. If it's not safety critical, it needs to be just scheduled in as soon as possible. But if it is a safety critical defect, then that vehicle needs removing from the road and not putting back into service until it's been fixed. If we arrive from work, obviously some van drivers would have the van at home. A larger proportion, though, would be coming into a depot to pick up a van. So again, contributing to fatigue. Look at the commuting time between the driver's home, because if they're going to be driving for 10 or 12 hours during the day, you need to make sure they haven't got a 2-hour commute each way, because that was the only job they could get, or they're just trying to do as much work as possible. We need to look at depot safety. One of the key things where the HSE get involved are injury, collisions and fatalities involved on sort of private road networks within a business or in a loading depot. So training around low speed manoeuvring is a key thing, a key service that can be offered there. Loading the vehicle, again, another of the ones that the DVSA really look at. And I think in the stops, the vehicle compliance stops that they do at the roadside, they get something like an 80 to 90% hit rate for overloaded vans. They know what they're looking at, but overloading vehicles is a really significant problem. So training drivers in loading is critical, A, so they don't overload it, but B, something else that's coming through now with the increase in last mile delivery and online ordering is the center of gravity changing as these big loads get delivered throughout the day on a multi-drop cycle, that you can end up with the van being top heavy, and there's an increasing number of rollovers partway through the day where the drivers should understand that they might need to rearrange the load partway through the day to improve the balance of the vehicle. Looking at work instructions, again, this is something that can trip companies up. Realistic journey planning. I'm sure you're all in the same boat as me. I can't go out of my house. There's probably about 4 different routes to different towns. Every single one of them has got some kind of roadworks on them at the moment, holding people up. Journey planning needs to include realistic work schedules that allow for proper rest breaks. It allows for incidents that could occur slightly during the day to trip up that schedule. If any schedule encourages a driver to speed, that the company is legally liable for that. That could be deemed to be an aggravating factor. As could financial incentives. So, with commercial vehicle drivers, it could be a delivery work schedule that could be causing them to speed. But with car drivers, it could be sales teams trying to get a number more meetings in, or a number of extra sales in to try and get a bonus. And that equally could be deemed to be a contributing factor to an incident if speed was involved. Then we get to on the journey, and this is obviously something I'm sure many of you are involved in as well, both with in-vehicle training and maybe with classroom driver awareness workshops, that kind of thing. Understanding that it's not simply acceptable for a company to say my driver's passed their driving test, therefore we just give them a set of keys, wish them all the best, and send them out on the road. They need making aware of what's in the highway code. They need making aware of things like vans having different speed limits to cars, things like mobile phone policy and fatigue. They need to understand all of this so that they drive safely while they're on the road. They again get where they're going, so we're at the customer. This could be similar kind of risks to when we arrived at work. So the customer could have a depot, so there's low speed maneuvering issues. But equally, they could be stopping at the roadside and having to interface with pedestrians. It could involve driving over pavements to get into a loading area. It could be involve parking next to the pavement. You've got vulnerable road users such as cyclists going past and pedestrians walking past. So again, drivers need to be trained and understand the risks involved in that. And the final part of this kind of section is what to do in an emergency, because obviously many people will panic if they are in an incident, and it doesn't matter how many times you've told them what the procedure is, they'll forget key things. So having written procedures for this, maybe having an app that talks the driver through this is a good way of doing it. But ensure your drivers have got breakdown procedures, what to do in the event of an incident, what information to record, whether it's damage or theft as well. It might be calling an accident management company so that they can talk to any third parties involved and arrange recovery. But failing to do that can obviously cause significant anxiety for the drivers and potentially risk to other road users if they're not able to deal with that straight away. So that is effectively where all the risks can occur in work-related road risks for an employer. But the key point I want you to really take away from that is actually only number 7 is the one where they're on the road driving. Everything else is a risk management procedure or element that the company has to do. And this is what could open up the services that you can offer to fleet customers. So if you're already a fleet driver trainer, but all you do is in-vehicle training, there's a huge number of opportunities here for you to understand some of these areas in greater detail and broaden the services you offer to include management awareness and training, risk assessment of the whole business's driving activities. and to offer some really key services that could not only help improve the safety within the business, but could actually help them significantly control costs in a number of areas as well, which I'll talk about in a second. So having understand what risk is and where it occurs, where does driving for better business fit into that? So our mission is to improve safety for all those who drive or ride for work by sharing good management and demonstrating significant business benefits. It is a free to access program. We've created a number of tools and resources which employers can use, you can use with employers as well, and help them achieve some of the results that businesses have achieved involved in driving for better business. I've chosen these 8 companies. We've got many, many more, but the reductions shown there are the reductions in collisions or insurance claims that come from managing that risk well. They're different percentages. Some of them have been doing it longer. Gateshead Council's been doing it for around 10 years. British Gas has been doing it for around 10 years, but actually that 33% is just a reduction over a 12-month period. And a number of those companies, they haven't all done it using our resources. Some of them do it just because they're good at it and they've been doing it for a long time. Other companies, such as the 4 along the bottom, have actually taken inspiration from the 4 on the top and used our resources. So they've mimicked that behavior. They've managed to get similar incident reductions by using our resources and following the case studies and the policies and procedures that those other companies have put in place, and they've seen equally significant reductions in collisions. But it's not just about that, because what you get from that is a significant number of other business benefits. So in addition to the collision reductions and third-party claims, that obviously leads on to, substantial reductions in insurance premiums. We've seen companies with 10-20% year-on-year reductions in insurance premiums, and that even though at times their fleet is increasing as well, because they're managing to bring the premium per vehicle down. Companies that use telematics often see a significant increase in driving scores from those, because the drivers now know they're being monitored. That results in a significant reduction in speeding incidents, which we clearly see in the case study, then directly impacts the number of collisions in the business. But you've then got a lot of costs in the business, such as maintenance and servicing costs and fuel use and tires and that kind of thing. And quite often these aren't tagged to individual drivers. They might be tagged to vehicles, but they're often just written off as the cost of doing business. Yet if they're monitored in sort of relation to individual drivers, you can quite often see significant telltales as to drivers that have maybe got maybe need some improvement in attitude, or sometimes skill, but often it's an attitude issue rather than a skill issue. Generally, people sort of understand how to drive. It's how they act and behave and think, and whether they're distracted or not on the roads. Fuel use, really significant to businesses at the moment with the cost of living increases, which also impacts on their sustainability scores, which certainly for larger companies is becoming increasingly important. Actually, one of the biggest costs and important factors in risk management for the businesses that I speak to is often the disruption caused by vehicle off-road time. That's the biggest cost often, and the biggest disruption, while the vehicle's off-road either for an accident or for unplanned maintenance to be repaired, because the business has then got either they're losing an opportunity to make deliveries, or they're having to significantly spend amounts of money on replacement vehicles and drivers to keep up with their delivery schedules. So those are some of the business benefits that accrue directly from better risk management and improved driver safety. Now, I mentioned earlier when I was talking about driver policy that this needs to be shared wider than just drivers. And this gives you an example, because quite often risk management within any business, driver risk management, there isn't a driver risk manager. Quite often elements of it are shared between different people and job roles. So a director has a named director should have overall responsibility for driver risk. That's often not the case, but it should do. Finance department can be involved because obviously they will hold the purse strings for any interventions such as driver training that might be implemented. A safety manager, we deal with loads of safety managers, and quite often they're just focused on stopping people getting injured or killed in a factory or a depot, and driving actually isn't on their radar. They don't realize where driving for work fits into their portfolio. You've got operations departments, which are the people who could be setting unrealistic work schedules for the drivers. The line managers might not have proper authority or management skills to deal with their drivers. Quite often they're drivers who've been promoted to that role and actually aren't trained to do that management role properly. Fleet managers often take on the responsibility for driver risk management, but equally often they're simply a procurement and maintenance role and actually don't get involved in driver risk management at all. And HR managers could be involved because they could be involved in the recruitment, determining any training requirements and managing grey fleet drivers that I spoke about earlier. So it can be a real challenge within any business or organisation trying to work out who actually has responsibility. In reality, a lot of people share that responsibility. So there's lots of opportunities for engaging with businesses and raising awareness of these issues at the different levels of management within the business. So how we help them is we've created a 7-step framework as a basis for how most successful businesses in this area manage road risk. This is what they do. We actually have an actionable element to every one of those steps, but in reality, as companies get bigger, they're going to have their own systems and such like for managing some of this and communicating with drivers. So what we tend to find is companies sort of start using our resources for this, and then as they mature from a safety point of view, they start to develop their own resources to improve their journey through that. But so to get to the opportunities for fleet driver trainers, where I would suggest that you look to expand, and where many of the organisations we talk to could really benefit from some additional advice, is to start by advising the leaders and managers in that business on risk. As I explained earlier, it's not just about in-vehicle training, which can be a key part of that, but it's about explaining the risk so that those managers understand what the risk is, why they need to manage it, the benefits of managing it, because that can often help to loosen some purse strings to put some other interventions in place. It could be putting telematics in which case, the drivers are going to maybe need coaching around that, developing policies to help manage all of those things, and to create broader driver coaching and awareness programs. Obviously, driver induction is a key thing, especially where you may be looking at specialist vehicles, van drivers, low-speed manoeuvring, that kind of thing. In-vehicle assessment and training, and I think that again becomes particularly important where drivers have demonstrated a history of poor driving, poor decision making, or if it's just they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe some kind of rehabilitation training to get them back on the road and recover any confidence they may have lost from that. And obviously a significant opportunity for workshop-based stuff that maybe expands beyond a traditional driver awareness workshop and starts to include managers as well, explains to drivers some of the broader benefits and that the business accrues from that in terms of efficiency and performance, and making it a nicer environment to work for drivers because it reduces the pressure and improves mental well-being, which we've seen significant improvements from as well. So there's opportunities around all of this, and there's some resources that we have, again, all free, which are available for you to use. They're online, and I will share. You should be able to fairly easily find all of these under our resources section at drivingforbetterbusiness.com. But I will share any direct links, which I'm happy for Carly to share with everybody afterwards with the recording. We've got a simple 6-question kind of thought provoker, I guess, to talk through with a business owner or a fleet manager to get them to really kind of understand how confident they are. Most people will typically say, oh yeah, I'm confident all my drivers and vehicles are safe. But if you say, you know, number one, are all your vehicles safe and roadworthy today? Yeah, we are. We're entirely confident because they all do vehicle checks. Well, how confident are you that none of them missed their vehicle checks today? Or how confident are you that they all did, that they all checked their tire, they spent the right amount of time checking tires and this, that, and the other? And when you actually drill down a bit deeper, actually, well, maybe they could have missed some. Maybe I'm not as confident as I thought. That then leads into risk management gap analysis, which is, I think, around 65 questions in total. It's split into 8 sections, and this really drills down. So if those businesses are not 100% confident in each of those questions, this will help them drill down and maybe find out where there are gaps in their management that could be causing that lack of confidence. So we've got 4 mandatory sections on the organization. So that's to do with, have they got the right policies? Have they got the right training for senior management in place? Do the managers understand the risk? We've got sections on managing drivers, vehicles, and journeys. And then we've got 4 additional optional sections for specific companies that may have other types of risks. So one is around specialist vehicles, some of which may have exemptions from things like MOTs. We've got a section around towing, which again is still important despite the removal of the towing category on the license. It's still important that you look through that and provide training in certain areas such as correct hitching, manoeuvring, loading, all of that. And we've got sections for motorcycles and what we call procured transport, where businesses are outsourcing their transport. So they might be hiring in minibuses or private hire or taxis, that kind of thing, to run staff about. The company still has a responsibility for their staff and needs to ensure that any outsourced transport providers manage their risk appropriately. So once you've found some of those gaps, we've got a range of other tools that can be shared with drivers and managers. One we won an award for last year is our Van Driver Toolkit. So this is a series of driver safety updates available. They're in a range of formats, from PDFs, videos, mobile-friendly web pages. At the moment, we've got 37 topics. So if a company was to take each of those and distribute them to their drivers one a month, that's a free 3-year driver safety communication program, which they can use. And we constantly update this and refresh it every year to take account of legislation changes or any additional topics that we feel need to be included. Yeah. Linked to that, we've got a growing set of video toolbox talks. Now, each of these are anywhere between 7 and 10 minutes long, I think, depending on the complexity of the issue. We've got them all loaded into YouTube, which you can use, but you can also download the original video files from the Driving for Better Business website or the Van Driver Toolkit website and embed those into your own presentation. So they're entirely free. You can deliver those as part of a classroom workshop. I think there's some trainer notes. There's a single sheet of trainer notes that goes along each of those videos, but they're free to download and for you to use as well as part of your own presentations. And then a final resource we created with one of our partners, Fleet Check, who make fleet management software. We've created a little training course, online training course. It takes about just under 2 hours to go through all the modules. There's about 35 short video modules, about sort of 2, 3, 4 minutes each. And it talks through a scenario where a van driver is involved in an injury collision with a cyclist. We look at 20 common mistakes that are made. They're not always obviously all made at the same time, but they all came to pass on this particular fictitious incident, which resulted in an injury. And so we look at what companies typically get wrong. It's obviously easy to blame the driver to start with, but actually when we dig into the story, we find the company was causing a lot of the issues through poor management that led to that incident. So that would give you a really good understanding of where risk lies in a business. along those 9 sort of stages of a van driver's day that I talked you through earlier. It talks through each of those in the context of a story. And at the end of that course, you're able to download a free policy template for driving for work, which businesses can use. So, if you're consulting with any fleet operators, they can register, they can go through that course, and they can basically edit and download a legally written, it's been written by a team of lawyers, a proper driving for work policy template. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you can see some opportunities to expand your services within the fleet driver training sector, and if you do, we're there to help as much as we can, and hopefully there's a number of resources that will be able to support you in doing that. So thank you very much for listening. I'll pass back to Carly, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. Very comprehensive presentation there, and some brilliant resources to help people who are either already working in fleet or thinking of transitioning onto that sector of training. On that note, we'll shortly be scheduling some more of our fleet trainer courses. Some of you on this call will already have been through that route, but if you're thinking of becoming a qualified fleet trainer ready for being on the DVSA register, we'll be opening up those courses soon. They're usually very popular and sell out quick, because we're one of the few providers of a DVSA accredited course to such a high standard. So make sure when you see that email come through, if it's of interest to you or your colleagues, you sign up for that one straight away. I just wanted to pick up, Simon, actually, on an important point that you made on risk and managing risk. And one of the things you find in a lot of occupational risk cases that end up being legal cases or criminal prosecutions is looking at, is there enough evidence that the fleet or the drivers or the company, the corporate body, took enough measures to manage risk in the first place? And if they can evidence the fact that they've done their utmost to manage risk, then it's a better scenario for them from a legal perspective as well. And I'd say driver trainers, as well as educating corporate customers of that need, and that's a great extension to their service they can provide, it's also important that we walk the talk too, and sitting on top of, as we do, the driver training industry's, kind of biggest we're the biggest provider of professional indemnity and public liability insurance to the industry. That's another thing I'd point out to trainers, that get your own house in order first before you start going and talking to fleets. If you're not able to demonstrate that you have the right risk management procedures in driver training, it's a little bit futile and hypocritical to go and, advise a corporate body that you're, as your customer, they're paying for your expertise to have the same. And there's also a risk for you from the PL point of view. I'm just looking at a claim at the moment that actually, unusually, I'm likely to refuse, because although it's an insured indemnity, we do have the ability to refuse cover. And that is, in this case, it's a trainer who took absolutely no measures in a very risky environment for training to put the risk management in place. There's no risk assessments been done, no risk waivers have been used, a lot of resources that are provided by DIA and a lot of other people, but people just didn't take those steps. And the insurer is saying to us, we don't think we should cover this one at all, but also you're the group manager of the policy. What do you think? And when somebody doesn't take the right steps to manage risk, then that is going to reverberate on you as the business owner if you didn't set that up. That foundation wasn't solid enough in the first place. So I think getting into the mindset of, you're not just there to deliver some driver training in the vehicle, you're delivering risk management and good risk management practice as well. That's part of your job. That has to start with you as the trainer in your training business before you can go out and even tell other people about it as well. So I think that was an important point that you raised, that reminded me to remind people that the resources that we provide free to people as well, like risk waivers, risk assessment forms, all those kind of things, should be used in every instance of training. Now, one member wrote to me when we said in our policy details that we need to see you using these risk waivers. Well, how do I get pupils to sign these? Well, maybe you should be thinking about refusing taking people out if they won't sign the risk waiver or they won't go through a risk assessment with you, because it's at your risk that you do this. And it is at the risk that if there's an incident, they might sue you or something worse might happen. So I think, to enforce those policies, especially as part of your terms and conditions, is important, particularly for businesses that are centered in health and safety and delivering health and safety expertise as well. So I would say that was important. Now, I did have a attendee who wanted to raise their hand to ask a question. If you want to do that, we can give the ability for you to ask the question out loud. If you want, you can talk. I can free you up to talk, or you can type it into the Q&A. But if it was just a raise your hand by mistake, that's fine. We can ignore that one. I've got a question coming on the Q&A, Simon. What are the main differences to managing drivers who use their own vehicles versus company vehicles? So either grey fleet, people who are using their vehicles either commuting or express purpose of the company, or people have been, like gig economy, I suppose, that use a lot of their own vehicles.
There's no difference really in responsibility. A company's legal responsibility isn't affected at all by the ownership of the vehicle, because if it's a privately owned, the most common is privately owned cars being used for business. I guess in the sort of last mile delivery gig economy, there are a number of delivery drivers with their own vans as well, who are working as subcontractors to the main delivery firms. But essentially, as an employer, you are commandeering that vehicle as a de facto company vehicle for the duration of the journey. So it's being driven on business on your behalf, and as an employer, as the business requiring that service, you are responsible for ensuring that journey is carried out safely. So from a driver using their own vehicle point of view, you should still be checking licenses, you should still be communicating a driver policy. They're driving on business. It doesn't matter who owns the vehicle. They're driving on business. They need a copy of the driver policy. If they're doing something, that you need to make sure that the vehicle is appropriate to the use it's being put. So if it is a van, if it is someone doing last mile delivery, you need to make sure it's a proper sized van, and they're not trying to do a 300 stop day in a little car derived van and running around hugely overloaded. So really, the only you're responsible for the driver being competent and eligible to drive, and you're responsible for the vehicle being safe. The ownership doesn't really matter.
I think I'd add to that as well. Something that I quickly discovered that a lot of corporates in the city, particularly in financial services, don't seem to realise, having been in that world and now approaching it from another direction on the road safety side, is when I was a director of a private investment bank, I was given a car allowance. Now, I was never expected to drive anywhere for the company, really, ever. It was considered a perk to be given a car allowance versus a company car. Bear in mind, we were all city-based employees. We were mostly commuting in by train every day. So the company didn't really have an expectation we were driving anyway. It was just considered a perk that you got as part of your salary and conditions. However, that would be classed as a company, believing at some point you could be required to drive for work for that organization. We had regional offices. Generally, I would go by train or plane, but I was expected at some time to drive. Yet they never thought to give those employees any training at all, even at your desk video training, all those kind of things. So when you are speaking to corporate employers who think they've only got a certain community of people that are driving for them, you need to maybe press them a little bit harder that they could have a wider driver workforce than they actually believe they do. For example, are you paying anybody a car allowance? All of those kind of things as well. So I think sometimes companies, and you'll have experienced that more so than me, Simon, don't necessarily account for everybody in terms of who drives for them or who commutes and is a risk to them, because they could lose them on the road on the way into work, that valuable resource, and they don't necessarily train everybody they should do, even bare minimum training.
Yeah, one of the key points as well is, and you alluded to sort of people taking a car allowance. You've got a significant sort of salary sacrifice thing now, and where previously you might have had a training program for everyone who had a company car, a lot of those people now have their own car because they've taken a different financial structure for that. But they're still doing the same amount of business driving. So there's still the same risk. The risk hasn't changed. It's just the ownership of the car has changed, but the risk hasn't moved. The ownership of the risk hasn't moved. And the other thing that people, a lot of companies don't realise, and many employees don't realise it unless they're told, they need business insurance. Any journey that you make that you would not have made had you not been employed is a business journey. So that's even gets down to something like going to the local shop to get some milk because you've got an important client coming in and you've run out. It's a business journey. Going home via the post office, that detour is a business journey. And specifically now, with after COVID, the increase in home-based working, every journey becomes a business journey. Or if you're home-based, just going into your one place of work, if you're designated a home-based employee, even going into your normal place of work is a business journey. It's no longer commuting.
And I think the risk has got greater post-COVID anyway, just as it used to be a bigger risk for employees who didn't drive very frequently for work, because as we all know, driving for work is a different amount of pressure than, you know, just driving ourselves on our own leisure, social and domestic journeys. And you can feel more pressure coupled with your inexperience of driving either in a work vehicle they've asked you to use that day or being sent on a journey that you're not used to doing, plus the pressures of timescales to reach meetings on time, get back home again on time. You know, these are people who aren't used to being occupational drivers suddenly put into the zone of being a much riskier occupational driver with arguably more risk than some of the more seasoned occupational drivers, because at least the seasoned occupational drivers are having regular training, monitoring and screening. And one thing a driver trainer in this arena could look at doing is saying, you know, I don't need to just help you with your designated drivers. How I can help your fleet is talking to your, you know, infrequent drivers, because they can pose as much risk as some of your frequent drivers, because they're not as exposed to training and interventions as your designated occupational drivers. Even if it's just a talk to a room of those employees or helping them deliver some e-learning or whatever it is, that could be another upsell to a fleet employer about those kind of grey fleet and other people that are infrequent drivers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have we got any more questions, folks? I think Simon's been one of our better webinar presenters, because he's done it in a very short and pithy timescale, but delivered quite a lot of information for you. So if there's any other questions of Simon, or because me and Howard are here already, any wider fleet training questions about the industry, DVSA, anything else you wanted to ask us, we're very happy to stay on for another 5 minutes just to deal with those as well. Whilst you're thinking, if you've got any extra questions, behind me on the screen, you can probably see behind my head, DIA conference is coming up again. That's going to be in November the 24th. That's happening at the British Motor Heritage Museum at Gaydon in Oxfordshire, just off the M40, so very convenient. We're going to have a great lineup on the day. We have the Transport Minister joining us. We have Loveday Ryder, who is well primed to deal with any challenges on the day, because she knows that's her role, is to come and take the flak and answer your questions on the day. We've got quite a lot of other DVSA personnel coming along to talk about ADI enforcement and performance management, all those kind of things. We've got some really interesting subjects this year. One on emotional intelligence, why developing your own emotional intelligence as a trainer and delivering that attribute to pupils so they can understand their emotional intelligence is really important in developing better driver behavior. So it's not just important to you being a teacher, it's also important for you to pass that intelligence development component onto your pupils as well, so they become better, more responsible road users as well. So if you haven't got your ticket already, we actually sold out on our original capacity. We've just expanded capacity at the venue to allow us to get more people in, because we're getting the demand. That offer behind me, the code you can see in the pink box, has now technically ended, but if you haven't got your ticket and you want to come, you could use that code, I've been told, in the next couple of days. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues. We've got probably another 20 tickets that we can take people on before it becomes too busy in there. The ticket price, by the way, includes your entry to the British Motor Museum. So it's the biggest collection of heritage vehicles in the world, or one of the, certainly in the UK as well. So it's a fantastic venue. You'll get plenty of time to see the museum as well, and hope you can join us. But I haven't seen any more questions from anybody. So if you do have any further questions, don't hesitate to email them. Email me at carlybrookfield@driving.org, or you can email Howard on the support@driving.org. If you've got any questions specifically for Simon after this, email us, we'll pass them on to Simon. But in other words, I think the best thing you can, I've just seen a Q&A question pop up. Okay, that's fine, Rob. I've seen your email, booked him for the conference. That's fine. We will send information about the webinars, the seminars at the conference later this week. The best thing I can suggest people do is go to the Driving for Better Business website to access all these wonderful resources you've talked to us about this morning. And the website is, Simon?
drivingforbetterbusiness.com.
Nice and simple. I've just seen one last question about your fleet badge, how long it takes after you've paid for it to come through. Howard, you're our fleet expert. Have you got an average time it's taking at the moment for fleet badge to come through?
About 2 weeks.
I knew he'd knew the answer. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. So if we've got no more questions, I will close up this session. And we will speak to you all soon when we schedule our next webinar. I think the schedule of all webinars has now been added to DIA Academy, so check out those ones there. As I said, I'm also going to plan some ones in the evening, because I know that while some of you will still be doing after dark training in the evening as a night's draw in, it will hopefully become a little easier on your schedule to attend things in the evenings, as pupils not necessarily wanting to go out on the darker nights themselves, even though they should. And it'll make it a little less pressure on you to attend the ones during the daytime. So we'll try and do a balance of ones that are in the daytime, ones that are in the evening as well. But thank you so much, Simon, for coming along today. I think people find that really useful. And we'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you, Carly. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for spending time with us today. Bye-bye.